So, what is the right answer? We all start working on this from a really young age. Even as babies, as parents, grandparents, siblings stare at us and say a word over and over, mama, papa, until one day we say it and everybody applauds and smiles. And we think, gosh, I must have gotten something right. And we continue forward with this process of learning through observation and imitation. So I come from a family with 3 kids. I'm the youngest by a decent gap. And so my whole goal as a child was to not be left out. I wanted to be able to participate in everything that the family did. And so my family, when we would go on vacation, especially with my grandmother, would play bridge. And so I sort of thought to myself, if I want to participate, if I want to be part of the group, I'd better learn how to play bridge. And so I watched hours and hours of bridge, and I learned out how to play and traded in my stuffed animals for sitting at the card table and playing bridge for hours. And then in our school-based learning, we start to learn a more formal structure to this. There are rules, there are all these facts we start memorizing. And that becomes more complex as we move forward and get to high school, and it's sort of complex, multi-step problem solving. And we start to get a clue that there's some nuances here. There are nuances to science, to literature, to expression, even to social situations. How do I fit in with this group of cool athletes, but still hang out with my calculus friends and make all of that work? But fundamentally, there's still sort of this right answer that we believe in, the right way of doing it, either factually or stylistically. And the stakes get higher, right? It all has to be perfect, has to build that perfect resume to get into college. And so we begin to develop this deep-seated fear of being wrong. And so I came to Middlebury, and I think at Middlebury is where that peaked for me. I was a physics major. And in a very Pavlovian sense, there was no greater reward than getting a problem set on a Friday afternoon, working all weekend in the Science Center to have it in the professor's box by 5 o'clock on Sunday, and then getting it back a few days later and having all the answers right. And it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy that you will do over and over because it feels so good to be right. Well, while here, I also had a very different learning experience. I came to language school one summer to learn Spanish and signed the pledge, I will not speak English for 7 weeks, which seemed like a great idea. Until you go to dinner the first night, and armed with the 12 words I knew from Gypsy King's lyrics in Sesame Street, I had to ask somebody to pass me the bread. And very quickly, learning becomes very different, and you realize I'm gonna make mistakes, and that is gonna accelerate the process of learning. But I sort of tucked that away of that's how you learn a foreign language. That's not how you learn other things. You don't make mistakes. And so my education continued, and I ended up in science and medicine. And while medicine is a much less perfect science than maybe physics, there's still thousands of facts that you memorize, just in case an attending physician says, Lucy, what are the components of Virchow's triad? And you say, endothelial damage, stasis, hypercoagulability. And you get a pat on the back, because you could just regurgitate these minuscule facts on demand. And it's so rewarding to know it all. But then something happens. There's this moment, I think it must happen in everybody's medical career, when all of that becomes secondary to a decision-making process and having to make a highly educated guess. So for me, this moment was my intern year of OBGYN, and I'm on labor and delivery. It's 3 in the morning, and a senior resident says, the woman in room 8 needs a C-section. And my anxiety just goes through the roof, because at my institution, like many, this is the job of the intern, and I had never done this before. And so all the facts fly into your head, the anatomy, the steps of the procedure, the names of the instruments that you're going to tell the scrub nurse so she hands you the right thing. And you step up to the operating table for the first time on the side of the primary surgeon, And all of a sudden, what's the right answer? What am I trying to achieve here? Is it a perfect incision because that's the only thing the patient will ever see? Is it a fast surgical time because that has been associated with better outcomes? Is it beautiful technique so that the scrub nurse thinks, my God, this woman must have secretly done this 50 times before because this couldn't possibly be the first time she's done it? And then the anesthesiologist says, you may begin. And you have a knife, and you just make a cut. And you go from there. And you react to what happens, and something will go wrong. That day, some other day. And not terribly wrong, but sort of wrong in that, oh, I didn't expect that, and now I have to deal with it way. And that's okay. And so these skills of learning through observation, through very disciplined problem solving, like you do in physics at Middlebury, and then letting go of the fear of being wrong and just being in the moment, trying to solve the problem that's in front of you, are all at the core of what I now do as an entrepreneur. And so in my healthcare experience, these little problems started to bother me, little things with the system, and they all sort of started to build up until I finally just had this simple question of, why can't we do better? You know, how is it possible that we spend more per capita on healthcare than any country in the world? And we're number 33 on the life expectancy ranking by the WHO. Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. Is it that we don't have the right answers to how to do healthcare, or we don't know the right way to implement those answers? Like, what is the problem here? Is there a right answer to this? And so I started to think about, you know, is it because we're fixating on this one right answer? Which might be okay in some areas of medicine. You're treating an infectious disease like an earache, pneumonia, strep throat. What are you really treating there? You're treating a population of clonal bacteria that are all the same. They just happen to be living in this human being. And so you're giving a drug that's going to kill them, and then the human will clean up the rest. But what about non-communicable diseases? What about chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, where I'm treating a population of human beings? And the problem is, none of us are the average. We can describe all of us with the average, but none of us individually is that average. And so by trying to have a defined approach, are we not able to get there because we're not addressing what's meaningful and motivating to an individual who's the person dealing with that disease? And is part of why we have a hard time getting there, because the healthcare system has a very low tolerance for being wrong, right? The stakes are really high. Somebody's health. How do you innovate on that? How do you take risks? So the good news is there are a lot of people working on this and actually making differences. There are employers who are redefining the way that healthcare is delivered in this country and contracting directly with a doctor to take care of their employee and just forgetting about the whole insurance concept. There are companies that are taking market research and the profiling that's done on each and every one of us that dictates what junk mail you get, because they understand you as a consumer, and they're saying, gosh, maybe we could understand humans as consumers of healthcare and what motivates them to want to be healthy and change their behaviors. And so now you can sort of get this living well index of an individual and what will motivate them to take better care of themselves. And you have companies like mine that are focused on, how do I help an individual with a chronic disease manage their own disease? Because that's the reality of healthcare, is that the responsibility is going to fall on all of us to manage our health. The problem with that is that that person didn't go to medical school, they didn't go to nursing school, and they really didn't sign up for that. So we need to support them in how they're going to manage their health that they may not even understand. How we're going to take some risks and answer a big question that there may not be a perfect answer for, but we're going to help improve the system in the process. So my challenge for all of you is, what are those little nagging questions that you think about? Maybe they're big questions that you can't let go of. And what holds you back from taking the first step, making the first cut, and just saying, I'm going to see what happens when I do this, and I'm going to react to it, and I'm going to learn from it, and I'm going to improve the system through it. And so can you let go of that fear of being wrong and take that step and just try, because you will be wrong, and that's okay. Thanks.